Ready?
I'm ready.
Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we've got Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone? I'm not sure how to follow that up.
First things first, thank you for tuning in on whichever podcast app you choose. Thank you for watching on YouTube. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach out to us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And we're going to help you turn your mess into your message. Right, Ben?
Yes, we are.
I got a red Solo cup today, Ben.
Cold brew?
Cold brew coffee. Shout out to Pump House Coffee Roasters in Jupiter, Florida. Pretty good.
It is good stuff. It's the Nitro Brew.
Nitro Brew, yeah. It's it gives you a little afternoon boost.
I think it gives me heart palpitations. For real, I think so.
Okay, well, I'll let you know if I get any.
I seriously, I think it's the nitrogen in it.
That's interesting.
Feels like my heart
I wonder if there's
skips
any
beats.
science behind that. All right, so here we are, and today we're going to continue our series on the 12-step study, and today we're actually combining two steps, step 6 and step 7.
Correct.
Why don't you go ahead and share, Ben, with the viewers and the listeners what those steps are?
So, step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings.
So why are we doing them together?
So, prepare, execute. You know how I've talked about in the previous episodes, the steps go in order of, generally speaking, you prepare on one step, and then the next step you execute with action, so to speak. And 6 and 7 is only 2 paragraphs in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think a lot of times they get really breezed over because they're 2 paragraphs. But emphasizing the importance of these, a lot of people breeze past them without really diving into what it truly means and taking it in and admitting what it means to you.
So what is a defect of character?
That's a good question. And actually, let me... In a way, no, you know what? I will answer that right now. Because, well, actually, could I give a long version answer?
I mean, it's already been long. But go ahead.
Yeah, the build-up. Yeah. So, all right, you ready? So, let me talk about this real quick. In step 4 and 5, if you've been listening to the previous episodes, as we've been going through this quote-unquote 12-step series, I reiterate, as I do every time, Tom and I do not represent Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole, the fellowship, 12-step programs, etc. We're just 2 guys sharing our experience. I always throw that out there for the grumpy old-timers.
And we are self-supporting through our own contributions.
Truth. So steps 4 and 5, you take an inventory. Now, 4 is where you take that inventory, as previously discussed. You discuss your resentments. You discuss your part in them. You discuss your fears, your sex inventory. Step 5, you disclose those to God, to yourself, and to another human being. So, with that being said, what steps 4 and 5 do is it reveals your character defects. You see where you've been selfish, self-centered, self-seeking, prideful, in fear in situations, etc. So you asked me, what are defects of character? I'd like to point out, because I think a lot of people miss this about 6 and 7. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. It uses the term defects of character in step 6. And in step 7, humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. Shortcomings in 7. Why are they different? So, defects of character... Going through our inventory, there are defects in our character where we find out what we need to work on, right? And in step 7, once we're aware of them its shortcomings. So let me point it out like this. In a way, we can go through our active addiction and our early recovery prior to doing the fourth and fifth step and say, I just didn't know. Ignorance. Ignorance is bliss, right? So what steps 4 and 5 do, 4 being a moral inventory, it brings forward the truth. And with that being said, once we know the truth about ourselves, now it's more of a choice. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. If I find out in step 4 that one of my quote-unquote character defects is I'm a jerk, if I go act like a jerk, I can't say I was ignorant to it and I didn't know what I was doing because I've done a thorough 4-step and now I'm aware. So more or less, I don't have an excuse anymore. And that's what 6 and 7 to me means. I no longer have an excuse because I've gone through and found out the truth about myself. I become armed with the facts about myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So once I'm aware, step 7 is shortcomings. I'm falling short of the man that I know I'm supposed to be and changing into. Make sense? Mm-hmm. I want to point something else out about step 6 and 7 as well. A lot of people look at it, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Notice it's not character. So when I first got sober, I was under the impression that I was going to say the 7-step prayer, and God was going to poof. All of a sudden, all my defects of character are taken away. Well, let me ask you a question, Tom. Let's pretend Tom likes to get into bar fights and his active alcoholism, right? You love bar fights? For the sake of this conversation?
Sure.
He loves them. Now, being quick to fight is generally looked at as a character defect, right?
Yep.
Let's say, for instance, you're walking down Military Trail to the taco truck that you so frequent, and you see a lady getting mugged, and Tom is quick to fight. Is that a defect, or is it an asset?
It's an asset.
Because you're doing it out of motive to defend somebody, to protect somebody, stop the situation. So, remember this. All character traits are God-given. Every single one of them. Where we go wrong is we use them in inappropriate manner. So, God doesn't take away your character traits. What we're doing is evaluating how we've used them improperly. Like, for instance, drug addicts are master manipulators, right?
Yeah.
I can use manipulation and persuasion. I do it all the time. But if you look at my motive, I use it to help people get sober. You know how many times I'll just throw it out there. Have we ever discussed this part? Sometimes I've told parents, one of the key things for me, being a group facilitator, my rule for myself is always be the best manipulator in the room. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting with a bunch of other master manipulators, drug addicts, and alcoholics. I make sure that I am the best manipulator in the room. I stay 3 steps ahead of them at all times. I set up my questions so that they answer them with the truth, and then I backdoor them, so to speak, to get them to see what they've been missing and reevaluate it and have new food for thought. You following?
Tracking.
All right. So in summary, I want to just say, 6 and 7 is about using our character traits in God's will for good, for love, for motives that are kind, loving, tolerant, patient. Because I can take any character trait of mine and turn it into a negative. But on the other hand, all those negatives can also be assets.
So when you take a step 6 and you ask God to remove all these defects of character, what does that look like? It's not something that you do step 6 and then all of a sudden you no longer have any defects of character. What is the motive behind the 6th step in the point in taking it in conjunction with the 12 steps? And why is it put where it is?
So I'll answer that by actually, because I already mentioned on the previous podcast, I haven't read much out of the book for sake of time and the format. But like I said, step 6 and 7 is only 2 paragraphs. I'll just go ahead and read it. If we can answer to our satisfaction, then we look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness. I reiterate, willingness as being indispensable. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can he now have them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. So in going through our 4-step, I look back at it, that part that's the part that's my faults, and I basically in step 6 become willing to do my best to never repeat those negative behaviors again. They're on paper, they're in front of me. It's about the willingness. So in a way to answer your question, you know that part in How It Works, it talks about we are not saints. We are going to have shortcomings, like step 7 talks about. However, am I willing to do my best to not repeat those same mistakes? And that is what 6 is about. It's about preparing us, prepare, execute. Step 7 is exactly this. I'm going to read it out of the big book. When ready, we say something like this. Now, this is a 7-step prayer. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We have then completed step 7. So if we look at it, we're turning over to God, to good motives, the spirit of the universe, whatever you want to call it, good orderly direction. All of us, good and bad. You notice how it talks about the good and bad? It's not saying it gets rid of it. Poof, it's gone, hocus pocus. It's re-emphasizing we are going to be using this in a way that is useful to you and my fellows. I'm going to go do your bidding, God. And whatever your God is, we've discussed that in prior steps, in step 2 in particular, step 3. What would your God have you do? What kind of man or woman does God want you to be? Whether you refer to God as love, the spirit of the universe, Jesus Christ, Buddha, whatever the case may be, what do you believe that your God wants? Be kind and loving toward all, I would bet.
That was pretty good, Ben.
So, yeah, man, I think that kind of sums up 6 and 7.
6 and 7, prior to recording this, I was asking Ben, is this one that we can do in 2 episodes? And he says, nope, we got to do it in 1 because there's only 2 paragraphs in the big book that refer to step 6 and 7. So what I would say is that these aren't steps that you want to, even though there's only 2 paragraphs in the book in relation to step 6 and 7, they're still very powerful. They still have a lot of meaning behind them. They're not steps that we're just going to breeze over, but there's not a whole lot of action, I suppose, or because we're coming off the heels of step 4. There's a lot of writing, a lot of intentional thought, a lot of, reflection, those sorts of things. And step 6 and 7, and 5, 5, you're just reading step 4, and step 6 and 7, kind of, not a whole lot to it, but very meaningful, very impactful. And so are these still considered going to be like your action steps?
To answer that, this is more for me digging deep within and kind of like step 3, making a decision that I'm trying to live my life in a different way. Now, you know how we constantly say on the podcast, best way to finish a step is to do the next one. 8 and 9 is amends. So if I'm truly willing to change in 6 and 7, in my heart, I'm 100% committed to being a different Ben. I get the opportunity to prove that with 8 and 9. And I won't jump into 8 and 9 right now because it's the amend steps and we'll do a podcast on it. But I'm going to get the opportunity to do some action and prove through action that I'm trying to live in a different way. And let me let's tie this into treatment a little bit too. Because I always like the psychology behind this stuff. Let's say, for instance, you've been to treatment more than one time. And first time you go to treatment, you get into a rehab romance. That rehab romance goes sideways. You end up relapsing as a result. You go back to treatment again. You get into another rehab romance. And that goes sideways. And you relapse again. It's 6 and 7 in a roundabout way is basically saying I'm not going to repeat the same mistakes. You don't necessarily have to have gone through these steps to understand the concept behind it, if that makes sense. Like if I went to rehab the first time, got in a rehab romance, and that's what left me falling on my face, and then I go back to rehab and do the same thing again, was I really willing to change? Tom, give me a second chance at rock. I'm really looking to do things different this time. And they come and they repeat the same thing. They clearly have a step 6 and 7 problem.
Mm-hmm. We see that pretty often.
All the time. People repeat the same mistakes over and over. And that's why 6 and 7 that's why you can't sleep on them.
Yeah.
You have to make sure with yourself, like, I'm definitely not going to partake in this behavior a lot. I mean, for me, hearing a lot of 4th and 5th steps, like, for instance, with a lot of guys, women are a problem. You know, we do a sex inventory, and they're willing to let go of everything except for their promiscuity. I say that right? Promiscuity?
I can never say that word right. Promiscuity.
Yeah.
Promiscuity.
But y'all get the point, where if I'm not willing to let go of that, I find myself in situations that I shouldn't be. I'm going to the strip club. I'm like, am I really changing? No. And it's very evident. And that's what 6 and 7 is all about.
And there are people too that live that way. I mean, I don't know any now because I choose to surround myself with people that are good people. But I've known over the years people that get sober that still do the strip clubs, and they still do all, they still live that same lifestyle, just minus the drugs and the alcohol. And it's really unfortunate because it's not something that people should model after, and it sends a bad message, because like we always say, the getting sober, the recovery aspect, all that stuff is so little to do with drugs and alcohol and everything to do with a lifestyle change and a change in, just everything we do, spirituality, emotional well-being, mental well-being, our relationships. It's all encompassing. We want to improve everything that we do in every aspect of our lives. So when we see these people that still continue to do the same stuff and they just, they put down the substance, it's not really in recovery. I don't think you're really sober. I think you're just, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll give a very simple example, and you all will be able to hear the insanity in this. For instance, somewhere amongst my journey in the last 12 years, I attended a meeting regularly where a gentleman would come in, and this guy bounces in and out for years. And he's got a big problem with prostitutes and crack. Those are his things. And he'll come in, get a couple months sober, go back out. And every time he comes in, he says the same thing. He says, I have a forgiving and loving God. God forgives all my sins. So, I picked up a prostitute again, but God forgives me. And I'm just like, man, do you not see the correlation and co-signing with your quote-unquote higher power that this is okay? And repeating the same mistake over and over and over. I'm not kidding you. I've seen this guy bounce in and out for 3 years. Never more than 60 days. Usually somewhere around 30. And then he's talking about prostitutes and crack. I mean, I give the guy credit for continuing to show up. And, what time he does put together, like, hopefully he's living decently for those few weeks in between, but it goes back to like you got to change your lifestyle. It's referred to a lot of times as emotional sobriety.
Yeah.
You know, for Tom and I, it's no longer about not drinking and drugging. For me, the problem's been removed. I no longer have an obsession of the mind to do heroin, meth, and crack and drink vodka. Like, I don't wake up every morning craving that beyond mental control. At this point, continue to work 12 steps and continuously being willing to get better is a staple of my recovery. I don't want to stay stagnant. I want to continue to grow.
Always be a student. That's what we say. Right, Ben?
Correct.
And using your higher power as a cop-out, that's annoying. You know? It's like, like, get out of here with that. Do you think your higher power really, he's probably annoyed too.
Yeah. And that stuff, it goes deep, man, where a lot of times we don't realize the effects that we're having on other people. I want to give an example. For instance, many years ago, I had a sponsee who would regularly pick up prostitutes and go to those little Chinese massage parlors, stuff along those lines. And we're going through his fourth and fifth step, and he tells me about this stuff in his sex inventory. Oh yeah, I pick up prostitutes regularly still after his fourth and fifth, and I'm like, dude, that is not conducive to your recovery. He's like, yeah, but they're getting paid. Like, I'm paying for this service. It's okay. I'm taking care of them too. And it was so ironic because this was right after his fifth step where he kept doing this. Like a month and a half later, he gets a call from the FBI. The FBI wants to meet with him and talk to him. And he was an over-the-road trucker. And turns out that one of the young ladies that he met with in a hotel in Georgia was kidnapped and trafficked. And they saw the surveillance. They weren't going to charge him with anything for what he did. They were just trying to find this girl and see what he knew so the parents could track this girl down. And right then and there, God works in mysterious ways. He finally saw, like, he had this attitude of like, oh, it's a prostitute. I'm paying them. They're getting what they want. Little did he know, he was picking up a girl that was there against her will, kidnapped and thrown into a prostitution ring. And it really opened his eyes to, wow, I guess I don't see my own crap, and I better be willing to change. Like, that's a problem with addicts and alcoholics, is we never think through the consequences of how we're affecting other people. We make these assumptions. How often have you heard alcoholics and drug addicts, clients of ours, come in and say, I'm not hurting anybody but myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's time to change. It's time to start living your life differently, because we're so selfish and self-centered in our active addiction and in early recovery, to be honest, that we don't see how we're harming other people. And
That's right, man.
I think that's all I got to say about that, Tom, because that would lead us into 8 and 9. How do I make that stuff right?
Good stuff.
So, solid.
Well, that was fun. Did I tell you, Brad Jensen? You know Brad Jensen? The sober bodybuilder?
Yeah, the sober bodybuilder.
He has the Key Nutrition podcast. Good guy.
Yep.
I talked to him this morning, and he's going to be coming to Delray Beach, Florida.
That's awesome. I follow him on Instagram.
Do you?
Yeah, he's got a good story. He was on the podcast previous.
Yeah, long time ago.
Years ago. Probably within the first year.
His podcast is really big.
Yeah. Oh, he has one now?
The Key Nutrition podcast.
Ah, gotcha.
He's got a lot of listeners there. He's doing very well. He's got 120-some thousand followers on the OIG. He's Sheena. Look up Sheena, Brad Jensen, when you get a chance.
All
it's
right,
really
I'll
funny.
check it out.
But he's coming, and he said that he'd talk to some of our clients. Pretty cool, huh?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Good guy. So looking forward to that.
Tom, we're not done.
Oh.
We forgot something.
What?
We have to do a shout out.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Shout out. We were supposed to do that at the beginning.
I know.
What if he didn't make it this far?
He'll make it this far. We'll leave it as a surprise at the end. We want to give a shout out to Garrett. Garrett, if you're listening, man, we appreciate you listening. I won't disclose how we know Garrett, etc., or situation, but he is an avid listener of the podcast and sounds like a pretty special dude. And we just we want to say, man, we appreciate you listening and hope that you can take the principles that we're talking about and get everything in order. And man, the future's all yours, dude. It can be a bright one.
Good stuff, Garrett. Keep it up, buddy. Whatever you're doing, keep it going. Keep listening to us too. We're gonna steer you in the right direction. Right, Ben?
Yes, we are.
All right. Well, hey, listen, that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And in the end, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.